Ironsworn is a tabletop RPG written by Shawn Tomkin and published in 2018 under a Creative Commons 4.0 license. It's got a couple of notable features that I need to mention right at the top. One, the rules are optimized for solo play, although they fully function for normal GM and player gaming, as well as co-op GM-less sessions. And two, the digital version of Ironsworn was released for the price of $0. Traveling with maps and terrain for tabletop RPGs can be a huge hassle. One of the great advantages of using maps from Arc Knight is that each purchase comes with a large travel pouch that can hold their maps as well as enough of their flat plastic minis for an entire game session. Assembling the minis right before a session is a cinch, and the effect of the full color illustrations offers a lot of dazzle at the table without much effort at all. In fact, carrying the stuff around and setting it up is almost as easy as burning down that perfectly good cabin that your party entered a half an hour ago. Ironsworn can be played in any setting you like, but the book does present its own setting in broad strokes. The place is called the Ironlands, and it's a sort of Nordic low fantasy world where the crops are failing half the time and the weather is almost always cold and cloudy, and getting a proper sword in your hand is a rare occurrence. I say it's low fantasy, but the book does have a bestiary that is mostly pretty fantastical, containing stuff like elves, trolls, basilisks, wyverns, and a creepy list of horrors. By the way, the art is all stock photography. I thought a pretty fascinating section of the book was where it gives you different options on generating the core truths of the setting. Through these options, the setting itself can be any of thousands of different iterations, and that's just from the suggestions in the book. The drawback to this approach is that you don't have a shared world with other readers, but the obvious advantage is that it's pure fuel for your imagination, and you can end up with a version of the Ironlands that most appeals to you and works with your story. So this game is based on the Apocalypse engine, but only partially. The core action of the game does stem from moves, which are actions that have a dice roll attached to them and certain consequences which usually connect to other mechanics in the game, but that's pretty much it in terms of connections to Apocalypse engine. Actually, the biggest hurdle when picking up this game and playing is absorbing all of the moves. When you are narrating your story, your actions will sometimes trigger moves, which usually require a dice roll. The thing is, there are a lot of moves. Within the 6 categories, there are 34 different moves, some of which are vital to the game's mechanics and others of which aren't as big a deal if you forget to invoke and roll for it, but honestly, most of them are at least somewhat important to the game. I asked Shawn Tomkin about why there were so many moves in the game, and he said in short the following. 1, the wide variety of moves helps to create interesting hooks in solo gameplay. 2, all the moves are pretty literal and aren't too hard to memorize after a short while. And 3, a lot of PBTA games have a ton of moves, but they're just categorized as different things. His points are all valid, but I will say that all the moves still makes for a grinding first couple of sessions when you try to play solo for the first time. So here's how the dice work in Ironsworn. Any roll in the game means throwing a single d6 and adding the relative core stat. There are 5 core stats in the game: edge, heart, iron, shadow, and wits. With some moves, you will actually pick the appropriate stat to add to your roll depending on the fiction. Let's pick an example move to work with. A very common and broadly defined move is face danger. When you attempt something risky or react to an imminent threat, this move is invoked. So let's say my character is trying to outrun an 8-foot tall wild boar. This is a test of speed, so I would add my edge stat to my d6 roll. Then I would add any other bonuses I might have, which the game calls adds. Adds could come from very special equipment, combat talents, rituals, or companions that I might have. The sum of my d6 roll, relevant stat, and any adds is my action score. Then I roll 2 d10s. These are the challenge dice. I compare my total action score against each challenge die individually. If the action score beats both, then it's a strong hit. If it beats only one, it's a weak hit. If it's equal to or less than both d10s, then it's a miss. Once you have that result, strong hit, weak hit, or miss, you look at the move description and see what that result entails. A lot of the results in moves lead to other moves. Let's say my face danger roll resulted in a weak hit. I'd have to choose between 4 different outcomes, whichever is the most realistic and or dramatic for my story. The name of the game is Ironsworn, and that refers to your character who swears oaths or makes vows that are sacred. In the game, you start with a relatively major vow, as well as a more immediate vow triggered by an inciting incident. These vows are so central to the game that they take up most of the character sheet. Furthermore, you can only gain experience points by successfully rolling a fulfill your vow move, which is to say, you don't gain XP through mere combat or fighting, unless that fighting was specifically and preemptively expressed as a vow. Any vow you take has a move to start it off, as well as a move to fulfill or a move to abandon it. The vows are meant to drive your drama forward, but they can be short-term, long-term, intersecting, parallel, or even conflicting if you're a real masochist. Vows, like enemies, journeys, and personal bonds, are tracked on a row of 10 boxes. Your progress on the track can be slow or fast depending on the challenge rank of the goal. If you make a unit of progress on something, it can either mean 3 full boxes, 2 full boxes, 1 box, half a box, or a quarter of a box. It's just sort of an elegant way to vary the difficulty of a task or goal, since achieving a unit of progress is usually the same in terms of difficulty. You just have to earn more units of progress on harder tasks. You don't really need to fill these tracks all the way to complete the goal. The idea in this game is to fill them enough to have a good enough chance of beating 2d10s in a challenge roll. At any time, I can decide I want to take that amount of progress on the track and use it in a fulfill your vow move. I just take the number of full boxes that I have, and that's like my action score, but it can range from 0 to 10. Then I roll 2d10s and see if I get a strong hit, weak hit, or miss. Obviously, there are risks in making a progress roll like this, whether it be to end a vow, a fight, a journey, or reach a milestone in a quest. Of course, the more progress I have on my track, the better the likelihood of a good outcome. You use a move to create bonds with other players or NPCs that can give you a small mechanical advantage on certain socially related moves, and you strengthen the progress of those bonds on a single track at the top of your character sheet. This is a bit more abstract than other progress tracks. It's meant to signify your general connection to the people of the Ironlands, not to any one person in particular. At the end of your game of Ironsworn, when your character is ready to ride into the sunset, you roll 2d10s to challenge this rating, and that determines the quality of your retirement. A major, and I mean ubiquitous mechanic in the game is momentum. Most of the moves and assets in this game will increase or reduce your momentum track. You want to get your momentum high because you can burn it to cancel out any challenge dice that are less than your current momentum rating. In other words, it's a fudge pool that can turn a miss into a weak hit or even a strong hit when you need it most. Combat in Ironsworn comes in 2 speeds. You can either unpack a fight with a handful of different moves, vying for an influential component called initiative, and whittle away the boxes on an enemy or group of enemies, or you can describe everything as coming down to a single roll in a move called battle. The obvious suggestion is to use both, single battle rolls for easy or unimportant squabbles, and detailed mode for the bigger, more important ones. Besides momentum, you have 3 point pools to track: your health, your spirit, and your supply. Each of these goes up and down depending on how well your rolls go on certain moves. And it's worth mentioning here, there are a lot of points in the course of playing Ironsworn where you are volunteering when to lose health, spirit, or supply. This is because rolling a miss on many, if not most moves leads to a pay the price move, which asks you to make the most obvious negative outcome happen, amongst other things. Whether you are directed to deplete one of these pools specifically, or if you choose to yourself, you can end up picking up a debility that prevents you from adding points back to their respective pool until you remove that debility itself with a specific move. Assets are these things that attach to your character which offer one sort of subtle mechanical advantage or another. You start with 3 assets of virtually any type, which means you can have more than one path and can amalgamate them to synthesize a completely unique path. The game has a fun physical element in the form of asset cards. You can print these out at home like I did on cardstock and some lamination, or if you want the much nicer experience, you can buy the professionally printed asset cards. The only problem with the nicer option is that these cards have fillable bubbles because you can level each asset up twice, and you wouldn't want to mark up your nice cards. The assets can be a lot of reading and remembering for first-time players, and the book even suggests not using them if you want a faster, easier gaming experience. But I did find that when you shuffle them up and pick them at random on a new character, you can generate some interesting combinations that drive your narrative in directions that you would have never come up with otherwise. Experience in this game is purely for the sake of your assets. It is earned by successfully rolling a fulfill your vow move. Depending on the challenge rating of the vow itself, you get 1 to 5 experience points. Then when you're ready, you can spend 2 XP to upgrade an asset, or 3 XP to get a new asset. The Oracle section of the book is composed of 19 different tables. It's really a fun set of tables that acts as the backbone of GM-less or solo play. Like the moves, you really need to get at least a little acquainted with the table so that you know which table to roll on or possibly roll on when playing. The book goes on to explain some theory about Ironsworn gameplay, as well as some concrete guidance on how to start and how to manage your quests. In a nutshell, and to quote the author, the game revolves around encountering and overcoming obstacles. If there's no danger, there's no rewards. So there's a game loop of running into trouble, overcoming, and earning rewards. This might seem obvious, and it might seem like he's describing every RPG ever made, but it's worth mentioning because once you actually sit down to play Ironsworn solo, you might lean towards the tendency of self-preservation. After all, you are your own GM in a solo situation, and thus you have very tight control over the amount of risk your characters are exposed to. But no risk, no reward. Alright, so here are my thoughts on Ironsworn. Cons. Lots and lots of moves. It's a steep learning curve at first. Trying to sort each beat of your solo story into one of the 30 plus moves is a bit stifling. I'm told that it gets a lot easier once you've sort of memorized all the moves generally. Fiction versus mechanics is a tightrope. The game is a bit of a peculiar one in that it offers pretty extreme narrative freedom while also putting on the table quite a few moving parts in terms of the rules. I wouldn't say that the game's rules are crunchy. They aren't mathematically deep, they're just wide. But then you're reminded on almost every page of the book to put the fiction first. It just seems like the game's mechanics are always jockeying for that position. This created some cognitive dissonance on my initial playthrough, but I suspect it might also be from the fact that I'm new to solo RPGs generally. Pros: all-in-one solution. If you don't already know, there's a whole world of solo RPGs and the genre has been around for a long time. In the solo community, there are some very well-loved and respected so-called oracles, or published systems that can adopt any RPG to be GM-less or run solo. One of these, called Mystic by Tana Pigeon, was acknowledged as an inspiration for Ironsworn, but Ironsworn is one of the few solo RPGs that not only provides the oracle, but the rest of the game with it. A multi-mode RPG. Ironsworn works as a normal RPG with GMs and players, where the GM carries the burden of making certain narrative decisions and arbitrating a lot of the rules. But it also works as a co-op RPG where the players work without a GM and just narrate together against oracle rolls. This flexibility is not seen too often and it's pretty neat. Killer expansions. I'm not going down the rabbit hole on the expansions here, but I do hope to cover them in future videos. Ironsworn already has a major expansion called Devall by Shawn Tomkin and Matt Click that offers an elaboration on fantasy locales and the trappings of adventuring in those places. Then there's Starforged, which at the time of this recording is available in testing beta for free. It's Ironsworn but in space. Then there is a whole universe of fan-created stuff, a lot of which I personally have found to be super creative and inspired. Ironsworn is a sort of foundational RPG in the solo world, and it sets a standard for rules description and fiction versus rules balance. And ultimately, in the end, it's actually really fun to play. It's really suited for anyone who wants to forge epic stories, but play a full-blown RPG at the same time. And if you still don't have the inclination to play Ironsworn, you can still check out a very energetic and rules-accurate actual play by the talented Trevor Devall of the YouTube channel Me, Myself, and Die. As always, thanks for watching. This is Dave, going back to polishing my sword. See ya.